Hello and welcome to What's in the Night Sky for October 2024. October's a great time to get outside and have a go at some astronomy. The nights are getting darker and there are some very exciting things for us to see this month. Some of the things we'll be looking out for are the Sea of Serenity on the Moon, the planet Mars, the constellation of Orion, and a possible naked eye comet. Let's take a look at the planets now. You can see that I'm looking towards the south at the beginning of the month, around 7 o'clock, before the sun has set, and Saturn is already above the horizon, rising before the sun sets during October. If we go forward by an hour to 8 o'clock, and you can head outside as soon as it gets dark and see if you can spot Saturn. You should be able to find it quite easily with your naked eye or a pair of binoculars or a small telescope. Saturn reached opposition last month, opposition being when a planet is best placed for observing from Earth, but it's still really well placed for observing throughout the whole of October. If we go a little bit later, you can see that we've got Jupiter rising in Taurus at around 10 o'clock at the beginning of the month. And Jupiter is a planet that is improving. As the month goes on, it will rise a little bit earlier. It is heading towards its opposition in December. And if we go a little bit later still, you can see that we've got Mars rising in Gemini. So you've got a line of Saturn, Jupiter and Mars by the time we get into the early hours of the morning. I'd like to focus in a little bit closer on Mars. So the first thing to look for when you're trying to find Mars is to see if you can make out this pinky red colour that the planet has. It's really, really distinctive. You should be able to see it with your naked eye. And it appears in Gemini at the moment as well, which is a distinctive constellation in itself. If you do happen to have a small telescope, then you can use it to see if you can make out Mars's disk. You can see it's showing a gibbous phase at the moment. You might be able to make out its polar cap, and you can explore the surface of the planet and see if you can spot these lighter and darker areas of the planet. The dark areas of the planet are regions of exposed rock, and the light patches are desert areas. The view that you get of Mars really depends on your viewing conditions and also the conditions on Mars itself. So Martian weather can make features appear brighter or darker, or it can obscure them completely. So what you might see can really vary depending on the conditions on your evening of observing. Mars also has a rotational period of about 24.6 hours. So Mars's day is a little bit longer than ours. And it means that if you observe on any given night, a feature that appears in the centre will appear in the centre again 40 minutes later the following night. So the time of night that you observe will affect the view that you get. Thinking a little bit about the history of Mars, Galileo was the first person to look at Mars through a telescope in 1610. He was unable to see any detail on the disk, but as telescopes improved, astronomers were able to make out these dark and light areas that I was just talking about. Some astronomers thought that they were continents and seas, making Mars warm and wet like the Earth is. People wondered whether intelligent Martians were going about their lives on the surface. In the 1870s and the 1880s, Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli produced sketches of Mars that had lots of straight features across the surface, and they were interpreted by some people as being canals built by intelligent Martians to move things around on the surface. And it wasn't until the Mariner flybys happened in the 1960s that finally put the question of whether there were canals on Mars to rest. During those flybys, they discovered that the volcano Olympus Mons was the tallest mountain in the solar system, over twice as high as Everest. And following the flyby missions, there have been various orbiter missions, lander missions, the Curiosity rover and other rovers moving around on the surface. And we now know a huge amount about Mars, and we don't need to speculate anymore, think about what might be on the surface, because we've got lots of evidence of what's there. We know that liquid water did once flow on the surface, but not in canals built by extraterrestrials. And more recently, Mars scientists have just discovered that liquid water is still on Mars, and that's been discovered for the first time in a reservoir deep underground. And that data came from the Mars Insight lander, which has been on the surface of Mars since 2018. And what it does is it uses a seismometer to detect vibrations under the surface of Mars, or Mars quakes, and the analysis of those showed that there is underground lakes on Mars at a depth of 6 to 12 miles. Let's move away from Mars now and take a look at the planets I haven't mentioned yet. Mercury is not well placed for observing this month. Venus, you might be able to catch it towards the end of the month if you have a nice, clear southwestern horizon near to sunset, just after sunset. So I'm going to go to the end of October, around sunset. And do make sure that the sun has set before you try to find Venus, because you don't want to be accidentally looking at the sun even with your naked eye, but certainly with any optical equipment, because you could damage your eyes. So wait until the sun set and then see if you can spot the bright planet Venus just close to the horizon in the southwest. And if you have a small telescope, you might like to see if you can see its disk and see if you can notice its phase. Finally, when thinking about the planets this month, we can take a look at Uranus and Neptune. So let's just go back to the middle of the month. In the evening, and Uranus is quite close to the Pleiades star cluster, the Seven Sisters in Taurus. You can see it over here. And as we've said before, Uranus is very difficult to spot with the naked eye. And even if you did manage to find it with the naked eye, it would be indistinguishable from the faint stars around it. The best way to find it is with a pair of binoculars or a small telescope. With a pair of binoculars, it will still not be distinguishable from a star. With a small telescope, you might be able to note its colour. And Neptune is even more difficult to spot than Uranus, much more further away and much fainter, isn't visible to the naked eye at all. We do have an opportunity on the 15th though, because it is close to the gibbous moon, and the light from the gibbous moon will technically make it even more difficult to spot Neptune, but the moon provides a nice pointer to help us find it. So if you have a pair of binoculars or a small telescope with a wide field of view, then you can see if you can find Neptune alongside the moon on the 15th. The moon also pays a visit to some other interesting objects throughout the month. So we've got the moon and Neptune on the 15th. If we go to the 14th, you've got the moon and Saturn. And then, so we go the 14th, 15th for Neptune, and then the 17th is the full moon. And the full moon on the 17th is also a supermoon. So it occurs around the same time as the moon is closest to us in its orbit, and the moon will appear a bit bigger and a bit brighter than it does at other times. So that's on the 17th. On the 19th, the moon is by the Seven Sisters star cluster, and there's actually an occultation of the Pleiades by the moon on the 19th. So that can be a really interesting thing to spot. With the moon being so bright, because it's a gibbous phase, and the Pleiades not being anywhere near as bright as the moon, you will struggle to see the Pleiades at all with the naked eye. So this is something you're going to want a pair of binoculars or a small telescope for. The occultation begins around 7:30, and an occultation being when a closer object covers up a more distant one in the night sky. So I'm going to take us to 7:30, and at that time of night, both the Pleiades and the moon will be quite close to the horizon. So make sure you've got a clear horizon. And I'm just going to zoom right in on this lower part of the Pleiades. And I'm just going to centre on a star, because that will just make it a bit easier for us to see as the moon makes its way through the star cluster. And what can be quite interesting to do is to choose a star and see if you can pinpoint the exact moment that the moon covers it up. And because these stars are pinpoints of light, they will appear to be there and then gone, disappearing in a moment. And it's quite nice to watch that happen and record the times that occurs. And it will take a couple of hours for the moon to completely make its way across the Pleiades and leave them behind again. Staying with the moon now, let's take a look at our moon watch target for this month, which is the Sea of Serenity, or the Mare Serenitatis. And if we go to the 17th, which is the night of the full moon, and we can pick out the Sea of Serenity. So we have so far taken a look at the Sea of Showers, which I'm showing with my mouse now, the Sea of Cold up here, and the Sea of Serenity is here next to the Sea of Showers, Sea of Showers on this side of it, and the Sea of Tranquility on this side. You might be able to notice that the Sea of Serenity appears slightly lighter in colour than the neighbouring Sea of Tranquility. It's roughly circular and it has a diameter of around 650 kilometres. And I'm going to switch to a different programme so that we can take a closer look at what we might see in the Sea of Serenity if we had a small telescope. So now we can take a closer look at the moon. This software that I'm using is called Lunar Quick Map, and it's a free browser-based software. And it's really fun to use because you can zoom all the way in, and when you do that, you can see imagery that's come from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. So you can get these super interesting, detailed photographs of the moon, of all the different features. You can also toggle on and off various systems of labelling, so you can have a look at lunar landing sites and the naming of all of the different craters and features that you can find on the moon. So it's a really fun thing to spend a bit of time exploring with. Here we have the Sea of Serenity, and I'm just going to point out a few of the features that you might look for with a small telescope. There's endless things that you can explore in this area of the moon, and you can have a look yourself if you want to find out what any of the features are called that I don't mention today. So first I want to look at this big crater on the northeastern edge of the Sea of Serenity, and this is called Posidonius, and it's really interesting because if you zoom in a little bit on it and have a look at it with your small telescope, there's quite a lot to see there. The crater itself is estimated to be about 3.5 billion years old, and it's been completely inundated with lava, so it looks like a flat bowl. And the wall of the crater has been eroded, and depending on whereabouts you look, the wall is more intact in some places than others, and it actually almost breaks down completely over here and leads into the sea. Inside it, there are two smaller craters. So there's this one here, which is 11 kilometres wide and is known as Posidonius A. And then there's another one over here called Posidonius C, which is just a tiny one, 2 kilometres wide, very small crater. You might be able to see that with your telescope if it's big enough. You need really a medium aperture telescope rather than a small aperture telescope to be able to see that. If we zoom back out a little bit and have a look at what else is interesting, you've got this line of small craters here, and these are interesting to me because they just appear to be in a straight line, and they are known as Linnae A, B, F, H and G, so you can have a go at spotting those. This prominent crater here is called Bessel, and then this one here on the southern shore of the sea, quite bright prominent crater, is called Menelaus. And the final thing I'd like to show you that you can have a look out for when you are exploring this area is the Taurus Littrow Valley, and that is where Apollo 17 landed in 1972, and I've actually toggled on the labelling for that for us so that we can see all the places that they went in that mission. And you can see actually that the Apollo 17 mission covered quite a distance around that valley. And one of the things that the crew of Apollo 17 found with their experiments is that the surface of the Sea of Serenity formed around 3.8 to 3.9 billion years ago. So all of this area is extremely old and very interesting to study. Heading back into Stellarium now, and I'm just going to take us 4 days past full moon. And the reason I'm doing that is because that is a good time to start observing the Sea of Serenity, because it's close to the terminator. And as we have discussed before, if you observe your lunar features close to the terminator, then it enhances how those features appear. You get these wonderful shadows, and it's always worth, if you're observing any area on the moon, to try and do it around the time that you get these shadows due to the proximity of the terminator. So around 4 days after full moon, or around 4 or 5 days after new moon, are the best times of the month to observe, but you can look for it at any time that it's visible, and you'll be able to find interesting things there. Moving on to our constellation of the month now, which is Orion. I've chosen Orion this month because it's just starting to be well placed for observing as we go into the winter months, and we also have the Orionids meteor shower this month. So it's good for us to talk about the constellation that meteor shower originates from. Orion doesn't need very much introduction because it is one of the most famous constellations in the night sky, and it's one of the most distinctive constellations in the night sky. Most of us have managed to spot Orion many times when out and about in the evenings. It does look fantastic over the autumn and the winter, and if we explore the constellation a little bit, we can think about each of its bright features. So starting with this one, Betelgeuse on Orion's shoulder, and it's a red supergiant star, and you can see its red colour. You should be able to make that out with the naked eye. And it evolved very quickly because it has such a huge mass. It's expected to go supernova sometime in the next million years or so, which on astronomical timescales is very soon. And astronomers are very interested in observing it because it has these changes in brightness, and we can study the changes in brightness and see what we can figure out about what's going on with Betelgeuse. When it does go supernova, it will be brighter than the moon, and so bright that you would be able to see it in the daytime. So it would be a really incredible event to see. See if you can notice when you're looking at it the difference in colour between it and Rigel down here at the foot or at the knee. Rigel has this very bright bluish white colour and quite in contrast with Betelgeuse. Other things to look at in Orion are Orion's belt, which is these 3 stars here, and Orion's sword, which hangs down from the belt. And Orion's sword contains the Orion Nebula. And if we zoom in a little bit, we can take a look at the Orion Nebula. And if you haven't observed any nebulae before, the Orion Nebula is a really good one to start with because it's one of the brightest in the sky. You can see it with the naked eye. It looks like a blurry star in the sword. And with a small telescope, you can see it as a much more obvious patch rather than a star. It's the nearest large region of star formation to our solar system, and you can look out for the trapezium cluster of 4 young stars, which you can see within the nebula if you have a small telescope. If we put the constellation art on, you can see that Orion is depicted as a hunter facing off against Taurus the bull over here with his club in one hand, and in this depiction he's got a skin of a lion in his other hand, but more commonly this feature here is seen as a bow and arrow. The Orionids meteor shower is going to reach its peak on the morning of the 21st of October, and it's going to be bothered a little bit this month by the moon, which is in a bright gibbous phase and quite close to Orion. So that really will affect the quality of the meteor shower this year. But that doesn't mean it's not worth going out and seeing if you can spot any. And you might see Orionid meteors all month, so you could try in the days approaching the 21st and the days following it as well. If we put meteor showers on, you'll be able to see where the radiant of the meteor shower is. So that is the point in the sky where the meteors appear to originate from. And as with all meteor showers, your best bet is to find the darkest site you can, wrap up nice and warm. Lying down is good on a blanket or on a sun lounger, something like that, and let your eyes adapt to the dark for about 20 minutes before you start observing, and that will mean that you'll be able to spot the faintest things possible. Try not to look at any sources of white light, which will ruin your dark adaptation and you'll have to start again. And see how many meteors you can spot. And one of the things you can do is you can sketch out Orion and the surrounding constellations, and then you can, when you see a meteor, you can draw its path on your sketch. And then when you've completed your sketch at the end of the meteor shower, you should be able to see that the meteors all appear to be coming from roughly the same part of the sky, which is the radiant of the meteor shower. This particular meteor shower comes from the debris left by Halley's Comet, which every year when the Earth passes through the debris stream that's left over from the comet, the little bit pieces of debris burn up in the atmosphere and we see the meteor shower. And this month, as well as having an opportunity to see a meteor shower, there is also an opportunity to see a comet. Not Halley's Comet this time, but another comet that in this case has come from the Oort cloud in the outer solar system and made its closest approach to the sun at the end of September and is now heading towards the Earth and will make its closest approach to us on the 12th of October. The name of the comet is C2023 Suchinshan Atlas, and during the first half of October it's going to be too close to the sun to see, but you should start to be able to see it in the west from around the 11th. The best thing to do is to choose a dark site with a clear western horizon at twilight. You'll have a window of a few days in the middle of the month, and then it will start to drop below naked eye brightness by the end of the month. And it's worth saying that comets are notoriously unpredictable, so it's thought that this comet will reach naked eye brightness, but we can't know for sure. It might not, or it might end up being spectacular, more spectacular than we think it's going to be. So it's definitely one to watch out for. So I'm going to take us to the 11th, and I'm going to go to my western horizon, and I'm going to go around sunset. And I think I'm going to need to go a little bit earlier than this. And it starts off in the constellation of Virgo. So as always, be very careful when you're observing around sunset. You can see it over here. And then what you can do is attempt to follow it over the days from around the 11th. And you can see that the position of the comet gets much better as October goes on. So the 11th is really the first opportunity that you might have to spot it if you have good eyes and a nice clear western horizon. And as we get over those few days, it gets higher and therefore into the dark part of the evening before it sets. So hopefully we'll have a treat this month with possibly a bright naked eye comet. And I know that I will be looking out for that this month. That brings me to the end of our night sky tour for October 2024. I wish you clear skies for all of your observing this month.